High up in the desolate, jagged expanse of the freezing canyon, the wind did not just blow, it screamed. Below the swirling vortex of white snow, a tiny speck of charcoal gray trembled against the frost. It was a wolf pup, barely 4 weeks old, violently separated from its pack during the chaos of a sudden, brutal avalanche. Its tiny paws were already numb, bleeding from the razor-sharp ice of the canyon floor. Every instinct told the exhausted pup to howl for its mother, but its freezing lungs could only produce a fragile, raspy whimper that was instantly swallowed by the roaring storm. As the pup stumbled and collapsed onto a slab of freezing granite, resigning itself to the inevitable sleep of the cold, a massive shadow suddenly eclipsed the weak winter sun. A bald eagle, boasting a fearsome 7-foot wingspan, dropped from the sky like a stone. Locals watching from a distant ridge through heavy binoculars held their breath, waiting for the apex avian predator to sink its lethal talons into the helpless canine. The watchers on the ridge lowered their glasses in sorrow, certain they had just witnessed the brutal, unforgiving circle of life. In the strict hierarchy of the wild, a lost, starving pup is nothing more than an easy meal. The temperature was plunging rapidly, moving past 20 degrees below zero. The thick ice cracked and groaned under the immense pressure of the freezing river far below, a terrifying soundtrack to the pup's final moments. Survival in this brutal environment requires a pack, a family to share warmth and hunt together. This pup had absolutely nothing. It was entirely alone, a fragile heartbeat fading against the uncaring stone. The giant bird circled once, twice, 3 times, its sharp amber eyes locked intensely onto the shivering gray mass. If witnessing this incredible display of animal loyalty and the hidden miracles of the natural world touches your heart, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel. Join our mission of sharing the wild's greatest, most unbelievable stories of survival and unlikely bonds. Your support helps us bring these unseen moments to light. Now let us return to the freezing storm, where a tiny life hangs by the thinnest of threads. The eagle did not strike. Instead, it caught a violent updraft and hovered, remaining suspended in the chaotic air currents as if making a calculated, impossible decision. To understand the gravity of this moment, we must look into the mind and history of this specific mother eagle. Just 3 days prior, a vicious freak squall had ripped through the canyon, violently shaking the towering ancient pines that lined the upper ridge. In that terrible storm, this female eagle had lost her only clutch of eggs. The nest, a massive structure of interwoven branches, mud, and moss built painstakingly over several years, was now completely empty. She was a mother burdened with an overwhelming biological instinct to nurture, yet possessing absolutely nothing to care for. Her haunting cries had echoed through the valley for days, a sound of pure, unadulterated grief that had silenced the smaller forest creatures. Now, looking down at the orphaned wolf pup, a profound and silent communication seemed to bridge the vast evolutionary gap between bird of prey and land beast. The pup, sensing the immense, powerful presence above, weakly rolled onto its back, exposing its soft, vulnerable belly. It was not a gesture of surrender to a predator, but a desperate, instinctual plea for a mother's warmth. The wind howled with renewed ferocity, kicking up blinding clouds of icy powder. The eagle descended, landing on the snowy boulder mere inches from the terrified pup. Her sharp, hooked beak, designed by nature to tear through thick flesh and tough scale, was suddenly incredibly gentle. She nudged the freezing pup with the flat side of her beak, a soft, testing, almost affectionate motion. The pup let out a tiny squeak and weakly, desperately buried its freezing wet nose into the thick, warm down feathers of the eagle's expansive breast. In that fleeting second, the strict boundary between sky and earth, between avian and canine, completely dissolved. The eagle stood over the pup, using her massive wings to form a temporary feathered tent, perfectly blocking the biting wind and trapping what little body heat the tiny creature had left. For hours, as the pale sun dipped below the jagged canyon rim and the true, deadly, bone-chilling cold of night set in, the eagle remained totally motionless, a silent, feathered fortress against the elements. The canyon plunged into utter, impenetrable darkness. The ambient noise of the wild shifted from the howling wind to the sharp, terrifying cracks of expanding ice and shifting rock. Predatory eyes glowed in the dark tree line far below. A lone mountain lion stalked the lower ridges, its keen sense of smell undoubtedly picking up the scent of the vulnerable, isolated wolf pup. But the eagle remained steadfast and unmoving. She possessed a terrifying majesty in the dark, her head swiveling continuously, her piercing golden eyes cutting through the gloom. She was now fiercely protective of this strange, furred child that the winter storm had inexplicably delivered to her empty heart. The pup, thoroughly warmed by the eagle's dense insulating down, finally stopped its violent shivering. It curled into a tight, secure ball, resting its heavy chin directly on the eagle's razor-sharp talons, completely oblivious to the lethal weapons it was using as a comfortable pillow. This silent, beautiful pact, made in the freezing dark, was just the beginning of a perilous journey that would eventually leave veteran scientists completely baffled. When the first pale, bruised light of dawn finally broke over the eastern canyon rim, the immediate pressing danger of freezing had passed, but a new, far more insidious threat rapidly emerged. Starvation. The pup had not eaten in over 48 hours. Its tiny stomach was painfully hollow, and the sheer energy it took just to breathe in the thin, freezing air was rapidly depleting its final reserves. The mother eagle, too, desperately needed to hunt to maintain her own body heat. But leaving the pup exposed on the canyon floor meant certain immediate death from other scavenging predators or the returning cold. The mother eagle faced an impossible, paralyzing dilemma. She looked up toward the dizzying canyon rim, where her massive, secure nest sat cradled in the sturdy upper branches of a towering, centuries-old ponderosa pine. It was an impenetrable fortress, entirely inaccessible to ground predators, luxuriously lined with soft moss and down feathers. But it was hundreds of feet in the air, scraping the sky. How could a bird of prey safely transport a land-bound, squirming mammal to a sanctuary hidden in the clouds? The complex mechanics of what happened next are a profound testament to the sheer desperation and unbelievable ingenuity born of pure maternal instinct. The pup weighed perhaps 3 or 4 pounds, severely underweight and frail from its terrifying ordeal. A female bald eagle is an incredibly powerful creature, fully capable of carrying heavy fish and small mammals for short distances, but the precise logistics of carrying a living, breathing baby wolf without accidentally piercing its fragile skin with lethal talons required an agonizing, calculated level of precision. The eagle took a few steps back on the snowy rock, bobbing her head slowly, as if carefully calculating the steep trajectory and the necessary grip. She approached the pup cautiously, extending her powerful yellow talons. Slowly, meticulously, she slid the curved, dagger-like blades directly beneath the loose scruff of the pup's neck and the thickest folds of fur along its upper back. She absolutely did not clench her grip. Instead, she masterfully created a secure basket with her toes, cradling the tiny wolf's weight rather than piercing its flesh. The pup gave a sharp, startled yelp as it was suddenly hoisted from the freezing snow, but ancient survival instinct immediately took over, and it went completely, heavily limp, mirroring the exact natural response it would have when carried by a mother wolf's gentle jaws. With a powerful, explosive thrust of her thick legs and a deafening rhythmic crack of her massive wings, the eagle launched into the freezing, turbulent air. The canyon wind immediately fought her, trying violently to tear the precious, heavy cargo from her careful grasp. The wolf pup dangled precariously above the dizzying, terrifying drop of the canyon, surrounded by absolutely nothing but thin, biting air and the rhythmic sound of beating feathers. It was a fiercely perilous ascent. The eagle visibly strained, her powerful wing muscles burning with lactic acid as she expertly navigated the treacherous, unpredictable updrafts, fighting the turbulent, swirling winds that whipped dangerously around the jagged rock faces. She flew in a tight, labored spiral, gaining altitude inch by painful inch. Every sudden gust threatened to unbalance her, to send them both plummeting into the rocky, icy river far below. Yet, the overwhelming maternal drive perfectly fueled her exhaustion. She let out a series of sharp, rhythmic, clicking calls, as if constantly reassuring the terrified flying creature suspended delicately beneath her. Finally, After what seemed like an absolute eternity of struggling against gravity and the bitter elements, she crested the high canyon rim and approached the swaying canopy of the towering pine tree. She angled her body sharply, bringing her massive wings in to act as a sudden brake, and gently, with the absolute utmost care, deposited the limp, exhausted wolf pup directly into the deep center of the massive, 6-foot-wide nest. The pup rolled softly onto the thick bed of dry moss and woven grasses, immediately burrowing deep into the secure, bowl-like depression in the center. It was incredibly warm here, perfectly sheltered from the biting canyon wind by the thick, meticulously woven walls of the nest and the surrounding curtain of dense pine needles. The giant eagle landed softly beside it, instantly shifting her entire demeanor from a strained beast of burden back to a gentle, nurturing mother. She immediately began to preen the pup's messy, snow-crusted fur with her sharp beak, utilizing the exact same delicate motions she would have used to smooth the fragile down of her own lost eaglets. But the massive, looming problem of food remained. The pup desperately needed mother's milk, or at the very least, easily digestible, pre-chewed meat. A typical eagle diet of raw, bony fish or tough rabbit carcasses would utterly destroy the infant canine's fragile, developing digestive system. What happened over the next few critical weeks is a marvel of profound behavioral adaptation that continues to astound seasoned biologists to this day. The devoted eagle took to the skies once more, leaving the pup safely hidden and resting in the deep, warm bowl of the nest. She flew straight down to the rushing river, utilizing her incredible telescopic eyesight to spot a shimmering school of spawning salmon struggling desperately in the icy shallows. In a sudden flash of silver and violently splashing water, she plucked a fat, heavy fish directly from the freezing current. Returning swiftly to the nest, she did not simply drop the raw meal in front of the starving pup as she normally would. She understood, through some ancient, unspoken, and miraculous intuition, that this adopted baby was fundamentally different. She firmly pinned the fish beneath her sharp talons and began to meticulously tear off only the softest, most tender strips of pink meat, entirely and purposefully avoiding the sharp bones and tough scales. Then, she did something absolutely extraordinary. She partially swallowed the soft meat, allowing the powerful, highly acidic environment of her crop to immediately begin the digestive process, rapidly softening the raw flesh into a warm, nutrient-rich paste. She then leaned gently over the whimpering, hungry pup and carefully regurgitated the perfectly processed food directly into its eagerly open mouth. At first, the canine pup was highly confused by the strange delivery method, instinctually seeking a warm teat to nurse from. But severe hunger is a highly persuasive teacher. The warm, incredibly rich food was exactly what its starving, depleted body desperately needed to survive. The pup swallowed the paste greedily, happily licking the eagle's sharp beak clean and immediately demanding more with high-pitched squeaks. For the dedicated mother eagle, this incredibly labor-intensive process became the new, exhausting routine. She hunted tirelessly from dawn until dusk, working more than twice as hard as she would have for a typical clutch of naturally born eaglets, simply because the growing wolf pup demanded food at an astonishing, relentless rate. The difficult weeks slowly turned into long months. Winter finally, stubbornly relinquished its icy, deadly grip on the canyon, and the heavy snow began to melt away, revealing the vibrant, hopeful greens of early spring. Inside the massive nest, high above the waking world, a bizarre, beautiful, and totally unprecedented family dynamic had firmly solidified. The wolf pup, now a remarkably robust, highly energetic juvenile with thick gray fur, treated the giant, elevated nest as its entire, safe universe. It would confidently pace the woven perimeter, peering curiously over the edge at the dizzying, terrifying drop below, occasionally letting out tiny, high-pitched barks at the passing white clouds and distant birds. The mother eagle was a constant, looming, highly comforting figure of absolute security. When the spring sun beat down too fiercely on the exposed canopy, she would stand protectively over the young wolf, spreading her massive wings wide to create a perfect cooling canopy of dark shade. When violent, cracking spring thunderstorms rocked the ancient pine tree, swaying the massive nest violently in the wind, the young wolf would simply bury itself deeply beneath her warm, waterproof feathers, entirely unafraid of the booming thunder and flashing lightning as long as it's giant. Feathered Mother was right there. The profound bond between them completely transcended species, pure instinct, and all accepted scientific logic. It was an unbreakable bond forged in the harsh crucible of winter survival, permanently cemented by a deeply shared, desperate need for connection and family. Meanwhile, far down in the Waking Valley, strange rumors had slowly begun to swirl among the locals, hikers, and passionate wildlife enthusiasts. Multiple people had reported seeing the massive local eagle repeatedly flying up to the giant nest, carrying unusually heavy prey, far more food than any typical eagle family could possibly consume. Some hikers even claimed to have heard strange, totally unbird-like sounds echoing down from the top of the high ridge. A bizarre, confusing mixture of yips, growls, and small howls that simply did not belong in the high canopy of a pine forest. The established scientific community quickly and firmly dismissed these scattered reports as nothing more than local folklore, writing them off as the overactive imaginations of people spending way too much time in the isolated, quiet woods. Eagles absolutely do not adopt wolves. It is considered an evolutionary and biological impossibility. The vastly different dietary needs, the conflicting behavioral differences, and the sheer absurd logistics of successfully raising a ground-dwelling canine in a tree made the very idea laughable to veteran experts. But one dedicated wildlife photographer, a patient man named Elias, who had spent decades meticulously documenting the rare, hidden phenomena of this specific wilderness, could not shake the nagging, persistent feeling that something truly extraordinary, something completely undocumented, was happening high up on that ridge. Elias carefully packed his highly specialized heavy equipment, specifically including a brand new high-altitude, silent motor drone perfectly equipped with a state-of-the-art, long-range telephoto lens. He trekked exhaustingly for 2 full days through the dense, thawing, slippery mud of the lower canyon, hauling his heavy, cumbersome gear up the steep, treacherous, rocky slopes until he finally reached a high vantage point that offered a clear, completely unobstructed line of sight directly to the towering, ancient ponderosa pine. He methodically set up his bright monitors, his hands shaking slightly from the residual cold and the building anticipation of discovery. He fully expected to find a remarkably large, record-breaking clutch of growing eaglets, perhaps an unprecedented 4 or 5 birds, which would perfectly explain the frantic, non-stop hunting pace of the mother eagle. He powered on the sophisticated drone, its advanced rotors humming so quietly they were nearly silent as it lifted smoothly off the rocky ground, ascending rapidly and steadily into the crisp, clear spring air. He guided it incredibly carefully, utilizing his years of experience to keep a highly respectful, safe distance so as not to spook the wildlife, steadily and patiently closing the vast gap between the camera lens and the massive, tangled structure of branches that currently held a breathtaking secret the world was absolutely not ready for. As the high-definition monitor in Elias's hands flickered and stabilized, the live feed from the silent drone camera finally filled the small screen. The sophisticated lens peered carefully over the thick, interwoven barrier of ancient pine branches and dried mud that formed the sturdy outer wall of the massive nest. Elias held his freezing breath, his gloved finger hovering anxiously over the record button, entirely prepared to document a rare, sprawling family of majestic avian predators. Instead, the high-resolution image resolved into something that made his heart violently skip a beat. There were absolutely no downy white eaglets huddled together in the center. There was no chaotic, demanding chorus of sharp, hungry yellow beaks snapping blindly at the empty air. Nestled comfortably deep in the soft depression of the sunlit structure was a thick, heavy mound of coarse, charcoal gray fur. The sleeping creature suddenly shifted, lifting a distinctively mammalian head. 2 triangular ears twitched alertly, and a dark, damp canine nose sniffed the crisp, high-altitude wind. Elias stared at the bright screen in complete, paralyzed disbelief. His scientifically trained mind frantically tried to process the impossible, absurd image. He rubbed his tired eyes, utterly convinced that altitude sickness or sheer physical exhaustion had finally fractured his sanity. He zoomed the powerful digital lens in closer, the advanced optics perfectly capturing the individual dark hairs on the young wolf's snout, and the intelligent, curious amber eyes that blinked back innocently at the hovering mechanical intruder. It was a juvenile wolf pup, entirely healthy, remarkably robust, and sitting perfectly at ease hundreds of feet above the dark forest floor, directly inside an apex eagle's domain. Just as Elias began to comprehend the sheer, staggering magnitude of his impossible discovery, the massive mother eagle suddenly dropped into the camera frame. She descended from the bright blue sky like a silent, feathered thunderbolt, her massive wings snapping open violently at the very last second to gracefully break her steep fall. In her deadly curled talons, she carried a freshly caught snowshoe hare. Elias braced himself, his cynical mind anticipating a brutal, bloody attack. He fully expected the sharp-eyed eagle to suddenly realize her profound, terrible mistake and viciously turn on the intrusive land mammal. But what happened next forever altered his understanding of the natural world. The young wolf did not cower, shrink back, or snarl at the massive avian predator. Instead, it let out a joyful, high-pitched yip, its thick, furry tail wagging so furiously that it visibly shook the sturdy wooden floor of the nest. The eagle stepped forward, casually dropping the heavy meal, and leaned her sharp, dangerous beak down toward the pup. The wolf enthusiastically licked her sharp beak, a classic, deeply ingrained canine greeting reserved strictly for trusted pack members and loving mothers. The giant eagle responded by gently nuzzling the wolf's soft, floppy ears, carefully preening the thick gray fur with an astonishing, unbelievable maternal tenderness. Elias watched, utterly spellbound, a single tear cutting a warm track down his freezing cheek. He was actively documenting a living, breathing miracle, a profound testament to the boundless capacity for empathy that exists deep within the savage heart of the wild. But as the warm spring days steadily lengthened into the hazy, sweltering heat of early summer, a terrifying new reality began to violently assert itself upon this deeply unnatural family dynamic. The young wolf was growing at an absolutely astonishing, relentless rate. The rich, constant diet tirelessly provided by the devoted eagle had fueled a massive, explosive growth spurt. The wolf was no longer a tiny, helpless ball of fluff that could be easily and safely tucked beneath a warm, feathered wing. It was rapidly becoming a heavy, muscular, incredibly clumsy juvenile canine, driven intensely by deep ancestral instincts to roam, to run, and to dig its paws into the solid earth. The sprawling nest, once a vast, completely safe universe, was now an agonizingly cramped, incredibly dangerous prison high in the sky. The young wolf paced the curved edges constantly, its heavy paws occasionally slipping on the dry, brittle outer branches, sending small showers of pine needles and debris plummeting hundreds of feet to the dark forest floor far below. Every single time the clumsy wolf stumbled dangerously near the dizzying edge, the mother eagle would let out a sharp, panicked shriek, rushing over quickly to physically block the perilous drop with her own massive, feathered body. She was living in a constant, completely exhausting state of heightened anxiety, her sharp golden eyes constantly scanning the pup, utterly terrified of the inevitable moment gravity would finally claim her adopted, ground-bound child. The profound tragedy of their bizarre situation was becoming completely undeniable. The fierce eagle had successfully saved the dying wolf from certain death on the freezing canyon floor. But by raising him up in the sky, she had inadvertently trapped him entirely in a world he could never truly belong to. He possessed absolutely no wings to fly down, and the sheer, towering trunk of the ancient ponderosa pine was entirely too steep, too slick, and simply too massive for a clumsy, heavy canine to safely climb down. The wolf would constantly stare down at the sprawling, vibrant green forest canopy far below, letting out long, mournful, highly instinctual howls that echoed strangely and sadly through the upper branches. He desperately wanted to feel the solid, damp earth beneath his heavy paws, to smell the rich soil and instinctually track the scent of ground prey. The mother eagle, highly attuned to the shifting emotional state of her strange child, seemed to deeply understand his growing, frantic frustration. She deliberately stopped bringing fresh food directly to the safe center of the nest. Instead, she began dropping the heavy prey on the sturdy, wide branches just outside the nest's woven perimeter, slowly, carefully encouraging the young wolf to bravely step out of the comforting bowl and learn to slowly balance on the dizzying wooden highways of the high canopy. It was a terrifying, heart-stopping, agonizing process. The wolf would cautiously creep out onto the thick branches, his soft belly pressed completely flat against the rough, scraping bark, whining softly in pure terror as the strong wind swayed the massive tree violently. But biting hunger and the encouraging, constant chirps of his feathered mother always coaxed him to move forward. The ultimate horrifying breaking point finally arrived late one humid, oppressive summer afternoon. The bright sky suddenly bruised a deep, violent purple as a massive, fast-moving supercell thunderstorm violently slammed into the high canyon ridge without warning. The wind did not simply blow, it roared loudly with the deafening, terrifying intensity of a speeding freight train, violently thrashing the towering ancient pines back and forth in agonizing, terrifying arcs. The temperature plummeted instantly, and torrential, blinding sheets of heavy freezing rain violently lashed the dark forest. Up in the giant nest, the precarious situation was utterly catastrophic. The violent whipping motion of the tree was simply too much for the heavy, cumbersome wolf to withstand. The panicked eagle tried desperately to cover him, spreading her massive wings extremely wide to act as a living umbrella, but the sheer, brutal force of the howling gale simply ripped her backward. The young wolf panicked completely, his primal ground-based instincts entirely overriding his learned comfort in the sky. Terrified by the deafening, booming thunder and the blinding, jagged flashes of lightning, he scrambled backward rapidly, blindly seeking solid cover that simply did not exist up there. His heavy hind paws slipped violently off the wet, incredibly slick edge of the nest. With a terrified, ear-splitting yelp that cut straight through the deafening roar of the raging storm, the heavy young wolf plunged backward over the side, plummeting rapidly toward the dark, unforgiving abyss of the forest floor hundreds of feet below. Elias, who had been anxiously monitoring the rapidly deteriorating weather from a safe, relatively dry distance down below, screamed out loud as he watched the horrifying, tragic event unfold clearly through his weather-sealed binoculars. The heavy wolf fell rapidly through the chaotic, thrashing branches, violently snapping smaller twigs as his body accelerated terrifyingly towards certain death. But the devoted mother eagle reacted with a speed and absolute ferocity that defied all logic and biological reason. She quickly folded her massive wings tight against her sleek body and went into a blindingly fast, near-vertical dive, dropping exactly like a heavy stone right behind the falling wolf. She did not foolishly attempt to catch him in midair. She knew instinctually that his massive weight would instantly snap her fragile, hollow bones and send them both crashing to the ground. Instead, she engaged in a terrifying, incredibly high-speed aerial maneuver. She purposely dive-bombed directly into the thickest, most tangled layers of the lower green canopy just seconds before the falling wolf reached them. She wildly flapped her immense wings at the last possible second, intentionally crashing violently into the heavy, pliable branches of a younger neighboring cedar tree, forcefully bending them downward to rapidly create a sudden, thick, springy net of dense green vegetation directly in the wolf's terrifying downward trajectory. The heavy young wolf hit the makeshift, living net with a brutal, sickeningly loud thud. The thick cedar branches groaned loudly and snapped under his immense falling weight, bending drastically toward the muddy ground, but they remarkably held just enough tension to completely break his deadly terminal velocity. He tumbled wildly and awkwardly through the remaining lower branches, finally crashing heavily into the deep, damp, highly forgiving moss and soft mud of the wet forest floor. He lay completely still for a terrifying, agonizing minute, the heavy freezing rain washing continuously over his motionless, badly bruised body. Elias immediately dropped his heavy binoculars and sprinted blindly through the torrential storm, completely ignoring the dangerous lightning strikes, entirely desperate to reach the dark impact site. High above in the raging sky, the frantic eagle let out a series of terrifying, screaming calls, circling the dark canopy wildly, desperately trying to visually locate her fallen child through the blinding sheets of rain. Down in the mud, the young wolf finally twitched. He let out a low, deeply pained groan, slowly and awkwardly pulling his long legs underneath his bruised, aching body. Miraculously, though terribly shaken and clearly nursing a badly bruised shoulder, he stood up. He violently shook the heavy mud and freezing water from his thick gray coat, lifting his head and letting out a strong, entirely defiant bark up into the chaotic, stormy sky to signal he was alive. Suddenly, a new, far more immediate and deadly danger quickly emerged from the dark, rain-soaked brush. The terrifying commotion of the fall and the distinct, metallic scent of fresh blood from the wolf's minor scrapes had quickly attracted a massive, completely starved mountain lion. The enormous, muscular feline, desperate for an easy meal in the brutal storm, crept silently out of the dark shadows, its glowing eyes fixed purely on the disoriented, injured, and highly vulnerable young wolf. The massive lion coiled its incredibly powerful, thick legs, preparing instantly for a lethal, devastating strike aimed straight for the wolf's neck. The young wolf quickly bared his sharp teeth, growling fiercely and backing away. But he was young, badly injured, and absolutely no match whatsoever for a fully grown, starving apex predator on its home turf. But before the mountain lion could even launch its deadly, calculated attack, a terrifying, ear-piercing scream ripped straight through the heavy rain. The fierce mother eagle, having quickly spotted the deadly ground threat from above, crashed violently straight through the lower canopy. She did not simply attack the giant lion, she absolutely unleashed the full, terrifying, blinding fury of a fiercely protective mother. She slammed feet first entirely into the mountain lion's broad back with the heavy, stunning impact of a falling anvil, driving her razor-sharp, deadly talons incredibly deep into the feline's thick shoulders. She furiously battered the screaming lion's face with her massive, incredibly powerful wings, temporarily blinding it and aggressively tearing at its sensitive ears with her devastating, hooked beak. The giant mountain lion, completely shocked and utterly overwhelmed by the sheer unexpected violence raining down from the sky, panicked entirely. It bucked wildly and violently, desperate to quickly shake the furious avian demon from its bleeding back, before finally breaking free in pure terror and sprinting rapidly back into the deep, dark safety of the dense woods. The exhausted eagle dropped heavily to the muddy ground right beside the trembling, severely shaken young wolf. She was completely soaked through, entirely disheveled, and breathing incredibly heavily, but her fierce, piercing golden eyes remained locked entirely on the dark brush, silently daring absolutely anything else to approach her precious child. The young wolf whimpered very softly, limping over slowly to press his wet, muddy face firmly against the giant eagle's bruised, heaving chest. Elias finally broke through the dense, wet brush, stopping dead in his tracks just 30 feet away, entirely mesmerized and silenced by the unbelievable cinematic tableau directly before him. The heavy rain slowly began to ease, the dark clouds parting to wash away the mud and reveal the profound, entirely unbreakable bond that had successfully survived the freezing cold, the dizzying heights, and the terrifying plunge. The eagle knew with a deep, quiet, instinctual certainty that her exhausting, seemingly impossible job was finally done. She had successfully and safely delivered her adopted son back to the solid earth where he truly belonged. She gently preened his wet, matted fur one last lingering time, her sharp, dangerous beak moving with unbelievable, entirely heartbreaking tenderness. Then, with a slow, highly laborious flap of her heavy, soaking wet wings, she launched herself upward, returning completely alone to her vast, empty domain high above the clouds. The young wolf sat respectfully and watched her go, slowly tilting his heavy head back and releasing a long, haunting, incredibly beautiful howl of deep gratitude and heartbreaking farewell that echoed endlessly through the wet, completely silent canyon. Years later, Elias quietly returned to that exact same remote canyon ridge. He had faithfully continued to document the local wildlife, recently tracking a highly powerful, extremely successful wolf pack that had confidently claimed the sprawling valley as their permanent hunting territory. The massive, deeply scarred, dark gray alpha male of this formidable pack was an absolute legend among local researchers, widely known for his highly unusual habit of frequently looking directly up at the sky and his completely bizarre, documented lack of aggression toward any birds of prey. One crisp, perfectly clear autumn afternoon, Elias was silently filming the giant alpha wolf resting quietly on a high, sunlit granite outcropping. Suddenly, a massive, incredibly old bald eagle with slightly tattered, heavily graying feathers soared smoothly out of the bright sun. It circled very slowly, highly deliberately, directly above the resting alpha wolf. The powerful canine did not flinch, cower, or bare his teeth in warning. Instead, the massive, terrifying wolf stood up entirely, his heavy tail wagging in a slow, highly respectful, unmistakable rhythm. He pointed his snout up and let out a soft, high-pitched yip that sounded exactly like the vulnerable sound a tiny, freezing pup makes when seeking its mother's warmth. The ancient, circling eagle let out a single, acknowledging cry in return, a soft, highly familiar sound that permanently bridged the impossible gap between the solid earth and the open sky. They silently acknowledged each other across the vast, unforgiving expanse of the wild, two entirely different souls permanently, beautifully bonded by a miraculous, unforgettable winter of desperate survival. The natural wild is not simply just a dark place of ruthless competition and brutal, unforgiving survival. It is a vast, deeply beautiful theater where the absolute purest forms of love, empathy, and family can suddenly bloom in the most impossible, incredibly unlikely circumstances. The animals of this world constantly prove to us that the true deep essence of connection knows absolutely no boundaries, and that a dedicated mother's fierce, undeniable love can completely rewrite the rigid, established rules of nature itself. If this unbelievable true story of brutal survival, incredible sacrifice, and the enduring magical power of cross-species empathy has touched your soul today, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel right now. Your continued support allows us to easily continue bringing these incredible, highly hidden miracles of the wild directly to you. Do not forget to quickly click the video on your screen right now for another absolutely mind-blowing story of impossible animal friendships. Thank you so much for listening, and we will absolutely see you on the next extraordinary adventure into the wild.